Thank you so much. And thank you for the presenters, for Marie and James. I really truly enjoyed your presentations. And of course, thank you to Sanne for this invitation. I'm glad to finally make it to Lund, and I'm glad to be among such amazing members of the community. So, my name is Jacek Smolicki. I'm an artist, designer, and researcher based in Stockholm and affiliated currently with the Hub for Digital Existence at Uppsala University. And my work takes place at the intersection of several fields. Here I just included this, one of these comprehensive lists that we all throw into our presentations, knowing that we won't have time to talk about them. But this is basically kind of three realms and sub-realms where I operate, both as researcher, artist, and designer, but also educator. So arts, interdisciplinary arts, humanities, very broadly perceived humanities, and soundscape studies. And at the heart of my work is an engagement with technologies, particularly field recording technologies. I explore not only how these tools disclose are made to disclose the world to us in very particular ways, but also how they can be reimagined and repurposed, how they can be critically applied in ways that challenge their original prescribed uses. Paraphrasing Anna Tsing and her reflections from the art of living on a damaged planet, I'm interested in using technologies to uncover and connect with the realms that forces of modernity have damaged or made invisible, or in our case, inaudible. But also besides exploring field recording techniques and technologies, I'm also drawn to alternative ways of capturing or experiencing sound through, for example, creative annotations, collaging, assemblage, and those techniques allow me to explore perhaps more deeply the kind of material and relational qualities of sounds and soundscapes. And in my work, I've been particularly drawn to places with rich, difficult, complex histories, but also places with uncertain futures. I approach them with sonic sensitivity that opens up to both their audible soundscapes, but also the absent ones, the barely noticeable or ignored, or after Georges Perec, the infraordinary sounds, those that are kind of mundane and we feel like we are accustomed to, but which still have a potential to tell us something about our present time and the past. And I got to call this approach, this very kind of eclectic approach in terms of transversal listening, and I will return to that notion in depth shortly. And here's an example of a kind of practical articulation of my work with absent sounds. It's a bell, a decommissioned plantation bell that later became a school bell in Concord, Massachusetts, where I did some soundscape investigations into Walden Pond soundscapes and the surrounding. And I use different techniques to kind of, to resonate it, to kind of bring its, its soundscapes back to life. Here is another example of no longer audible sight or seemingly inaudible. It's the tallest wooden radio mast in Europe, possibly in the world, located near the historical border of Germany and Poland, my homeland. And this structure played a significant role in the geopolitical tensions during the 20th century. Different ideologies were kind of sustained or spread through it, the German fascism, Soviet communism, and recently this decommissioned mast is used to provide 5G mobile network to the local community. Beyond working with technology and with those spaces, a third equally important component of my work is to explore different ways of articulating, sharing it, and communicating beyond just academic environments. Through, for instance, such embodied techniques like soundwalks, peripatetic listening sessions, workshops, site-specific and time-specific performances. And here are just a couple of images from the previous one was from the Topot Festival of Radical Soundwalks in Ljubljana, and this one is an ongoing collaboration with the Arboretum at Harvard University, where we explore different ways of listening to the trees, to the collection. And all these activities have helped refine, at times completely rewire my relationship with soundscapes. They taught me that soundscapes are not fixed entities, they're highly relational, and similarly acts of listening that happen with those soundscapes are also relational in how they depend on intersection of multiple layers, social, environmental, and technological, to name but a few. And as hinted at, this realization inspired my work on a concept of transversal listening. I want to mention that this idea of transversality is not new, or the kind of transposition of that idea into the sound studies. It's been explored previously by, for instance, Osa Stierna, who was mentioned here, or Am Kangiser, but also within the broader field of arts by Christopher Gansing. We, of course, don't have time to fully acknowledge their work, but I strongly recommend consulting their studies. So Sorry, I will just go back to this. As you know, in mathematics, a transversal is a line that cuts diagonally across two or more planes. And thus, transversal listening is about attending to sound and attending to listening as a vector that cuts across or perhaps spans multiple layers of reality. It's a way of identifying um, relationships between different strata of our environments while recognizing their interdependence across time. So one layer's particular resonance today might be partially an effect of past activities that took place within another stratum. And this approach resonates with some other contemporary concepts and approaches to listening, of course, such as the one explored by Dylan Robinson in his latest book, Hungry Listening, where he proposes an idea of oscillating listening positionality, which emphasizes moving between layers of different listening positions, not to replace one perspective with the other, or not to kind of assimilate one at the cost of the other, but rather to explore deeper relationships and deeper connections between them. And here's a quote from the book. And of course, Hildegard Westerkamp from World Soundscape Project was already mentioned here. Also proposes this idea of disruptive listening, which my approach to transversal listening also finds a lot of resonance with, where she speaks about the necessity to recognize listening as a way of opening our oral perception to the unexpected and even undesired and unwanted feelings, making us find ourselves in a state of uneasiness. So between 2020 and 2023, I was involved in an international postdoc funded by the Swedish Research Council, in which I explored this method of transversal listening by kind of practically engaging with several geographies. We won't have time to go over all of those cases, but for each of these geographies, I developed some form of a immersive listening experience, mostly through soundwalks, or what I called soundwalk compositions, which is essentially a soundscape composition with elements of a narrative that is intended to be listened to in a specific site and at times also during specific time of the day. And I will just hopefully manage to discuss two cases, perhaps more depending on how much time we have. So in 2020, with my little family, I relocated to Vancouver, the birthplace of soundscape studies and home to World Soundscape Project. And I came to start my postdoc research focusing on rethinking some of the methods and practices in this field, particularly soundwalking. But of course, a few weeks after I arrived, the pandemic hit, and then my intention to spend some time with the archive and archival material was broken or complicated, and instead I engaged in, or luckily perhaps, I engaged more in field studies, and this became my laboratory, so to speak. I was lucky enough to be based near Stanley Park. For those who don't know the place, it's a magnificent temperate rainforest, historically cultivated by Coast Salish people. And I soon began to explore its different layers and temporalities, especially along its shoreline. Giving that much attention to this is Stanley Park, which is almost like a separate, it's like a peninsula, almost like a separate little island, and Vancouver proper is to the left. And this is a historical map made by the members of the World Soundscape Project, where they were mapping the sound marks, kind of iconic sound marks of the place. And needless to say, that those sound marks are quite problematic as they pertain to very specific listening positions. And my intention was to complicate that and to also mark the 50th anniversary of this first exploration of Vancouver sound marks by creating a kind of counter archive or a contribution to the World Soundscape Project archive with other ways of perceiving that particular part of of the city. So on one of my early sound walks during a period of low tide, I stopped at a tidal pool, one of those little pockets of water left behind by the retreating ocean. I pulled out my hydrophones and gently dipped them into the water. At first there was silence, but then a faint rhythmic rustling emerged, a limpet scraping algae of submerged rock. Now, limpets are fascinating creatures. They are small aquatic snails with cone-shaped shells and powerful feet that let them cling tightly to rocks, even against crashing waves. They're often called the gardeners or engineers of tidal pools because they play a vital role in maintaining the balance of these ecosystems, also creating room for other species to inhabit the surfaces of the rocks. And their radula, which is this ribbon-like tongue that you can see here, is lined with tiny, incredibly strong teeth made of goethite, which is the hardest natural material that can be found on our planet. It's what gives limpets the strength to scrape algae while withstanding the forces of the ocean or wind sometimes. Interestingly, goethite. Oh, sorry, I'm talking about the wrong picture. So here you can see this is the kind of microscopic image of the teeth, sound of which you just heard. And interestingly, goethite is named after Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who, besides being a writer, was also interested in minerals. His work in observing nature led him to a concept that he called Urphänomen, or primal phenomenon, and it's essentially a fundamental event or force from which everything else emerges. And for marine organisms such as limpets, that primal phenomenon is the gravitational interdependence of the Earth, Sun, and Moon, which in effect creates the tidal variations. So their entire lives and activities, the entire lives of those marine organisms like limpets are shaped by the cycles of high and low tide. So basically what we heard in this recording and what I had heard in this tidal pool was of course much more than just this inconspicuous event of a limpet scraping algae. If listened to transversally, we might perceive that soundscape as a articulation of a microcosm of planetary forces, an intricate interplay of time, gravity, and life. And of course, this delicate soundscape doesn't last. When the tide returns and the pool rejoins the ocean, those faint sounds are drowned out and overwhelmed by the anthropogenic noises, such as the linear roar of vessel propellers, oil tankers, and cruise ships, ships waiting to enter the bay. There's been a lot of interesting research going on about the impact of noise on mollusks and other species that occupy the bay. And in fact, I think that noise shrinks the acoustic space for orcas who are also there, who have been historically there by about 70%. And it's all caused by this constantly on engines. So I soon began applying this perspective, this kind of transversal perspective on sounds to other sonic encounters there in the tidal zones. For example, during another period of low tide, I noticed metal detectorists combing the shoreline. Their machines made rhythmic beeping sound as they scanned for metal buried in the sand, sometimes lost among the same rocks that limpets fed on. And listen to transversally, those sounds can send us back to the early days of settler colonialism, to a time when gold miners were arriving in British Columbia after the California gold rush was ending. Some of the tidal sounds that resonated most with me were the sounds of trees or the logs, many of them cedar, that would drift ashore and rub against one another, again during the tidal variations. And again, if we apply the transversal listening position, their groaning sounds might remind us of the logging industry that has shaped this region since the mid 1800s. For indigenous communities in the region, cedar trees were sacred entities, often seen as incarnations of deceased loved ones, entities with voices, but for settlers they were muted, inanimate resources to be felled. milled and commodified. And until this very day, British Columbia is famous for using cedar trees for the utility poles extensively. I think there are about 800,000 of them within the district. So from all those excursions and encounters, I created a sandwalk composition. The recordings were combined with a narrative, like a layered narrative, uh, providing multiple perspectives on this part of land. The piece was designed to be experienced by the public while walking along the stretch of shoreline revealed by low tide. And in this way, it wasn't just site-specific piece, but it was also time-specific. And to achieve this, I developed a website with a script that triggered the piece to begin exactly when the tide was at its lowest along the Stanley Park shoreline. And this allowed listeners to tune into the environment's rhythms in real time, connecting them directly to the tidal cycle. As I mentioned earlier, this transversal approach, this sensitivity to the interconnections in our shared environment, has remained central to my work in other geographies since this project, Intertidal Zone. And here are some images from some of the collectively experienced sandwalks. And if we have a little bit more time,
4 minutes.
4 minutes, I will just quickly guide you through some of the other cases. This is geographically much closer one. A project developed in 2021 in collaboration with the Polar Science Secretariat in Abisko. And the idea here was to explore soundscapes of two Swedish lakes, Trekanten in Stockholm and Trollsjön or Risajaure in Sami, which basically are one of the historically most polluted ones, Trekanten in Stockholm, because of its vicinity to industrial sites, including Alfred Nobel's experimental site for testing different types of explosives, and a lake that is considered in public opinion in some studies to be one of the purest and clearest in Sweden, Risajaure. However, Trollsjön, here's the map just to tell you a little bit more about the context, geographical context. But Trollsjön's reputation as pristine is partially illusory. Standing there, you can hear the rumble of freight train, or actually 12 freight trains every day transporting iron ore from Kiruna, Europe's largest iron ore mine, to Narvik in Norway 12 times a day, as I mentioned. And that sound speaks of how most remote environments are intertwined in global system of extraction. And using transversal listening approach, I trace the sources of Risajaure soundscapes. First of all, I follow the kind of natural, geophonic soundscapes or sources of soundscape by climbing up to the glacier, meltwater, which falls into the lake, creating its soothing hiss. And then similarly, I tracked the hiss of the train that you keep hearing there, going back to Kiruna and exploring the soundscape of that place. Overall, the project, which also resulted in a soundwalk composition to be listened while walking along the Trekanten in Stockholm, aimed to challenge conventional notions of purity and pollution, revealing how echoes of the past and present human activities permeate even the most seemingly untouched landscapes. There's a website, I can share a link later on, but I think I will stop here. There are two other cases, but I don't think we have time. I'm happy to talk afterwards. Thank you so much.